The champagne glass hit the marble before Danielle felt the bruise forming on her wrist. Smile, her aunt hissed, nails digging in hard enough to leave marks. Or I swear to God I will throw you back on the street with nothing. Do you understand what that means? 3 semesters from your degree? Danielle smiled. It was the only weapon she still owned. Across the ballroom, men in tailored suits compared watches while the string quartet played something expensive and forgettable. Danielle had spent the last 4 hours refilling glasses and pretending she didn't hear the same words that had followed her for 6 years. The niece, the charity case, the one they only kept out of pity. She noticed the room change before she understood why. Conversations didn't stop, they quieted, the way a crowded street quiets when something dangerous rolls past without lights. Waiters redirected. A senator's aide lost his train of thought mid-sentence and didn't seem to notice why. That's the second glass they've made you break tonight. She turned. Kang Tae-hyun didn't wear a tie. He wore a black shirt with the sleeves rolled and a watch that didn't need to announce itself. 2 men had entered behind him and dispersed to opposite corners of the room without being told. Men who weren't drinking, weren't eating, only watching exits. I know who you are, Danielle said. Good, then you already know your uncle owes me 11 million won he doesn't have and can't pay by tomorrow. His gaze moved over her once, not the way other men looked at her, it was calculating. I'm here to collect, personally, my father would have sent someone, I find it more honest to come myself. Your father is dead, the organization isn't. He said it the way another man might mention the weather. I inherited both the debts owed to us and the ones we owe, yours is the former. Her stomach dropped. What does that have to do with me? Nothing, he said. Yet, he started to walk away. Wait. The word left her mouth before she could stop it. If you're going to destroy him, do it, just don't leave me here to take the fallout. Tae-hyun turned back slowly, something shifted in his expression. Not afraid of me. I'm afraid of a lot of things, you're not currently one of them. A muscle ticked in his jaw. What's your name? Danielle. Danielle. He tested the sound of it. If I offered you a permanent way out of this house tonight, apartment, full tuition, enough that you never have to see these people again, what would you say? Her pulse slammed once hard. I'd say people like you don't offer freedom without a price. Everyone has a price. I'm just the only one in this room honest enough to name it. 2 guests nearby found sudden interest in their drinks. 2-year contract marriage. My organization needs the appearance of a stable family. No investor finalizes a merger with a man they consider unstable, and a man running what I run is presumed unstable by default. Your side gets the debt cleared in full and a life that doesn't belong to them anymore. After 2 years you walk, no residual claims, no contact. Danielle looked past him. Her aunt was watching now, her face white with panic. I want every term in writing, she said. And I want my uncle to know the debt was cleared as a business decision, not because I begged. The corner of Tae-hyun's mouth almost moved. Careful, that sounded like a negotiation. It was. Papers tomorrow. He walked away. The ballroom exhaled around his absence, conversation rushing back into the space he'd left, quieter than before. The papers arrived exactly as promised and exactly as cold. Danielle read every clause twice before signing, non-disclosure terms, appearance requirements, financial structuring that told her more about the size of what she'd married into than any tabloid ever could. Most people don't read contracts before signing, Tae-hyun said, watching her. They just look at the number. I'm not most people. He agreed. You're not. She moved into the penthouse 2 days later, stepping into a life that ran on rules no one explained aloud. Security rotated on a schedule she never saw written down, a private elevator was recoded daily, and a study on the top floor stayed locked even when he was inside it. She found him on the terrace 3 nights before the wedding was announced, papers spread across a table and reading glasses pushed into his hair. You wear glasses, she said before she could stop herself. That almost sounded like teasing. It was. She leaned on the railing, watching the skyline instead of him. Were you before this, before your father's business became yours? Something guarded moved behind his eyes, the math of a man deciding how much truth was safe to hand a stranger. Structural engineering, London, 3 years in. He set down his pen. My father had a stroke. I came home for what I thought would be 6 months. That was 9 years ago. He never fully recovered his authority and I never fully left. Do you regret it? Every day I don't think about it, which is most days. He looked at her. What about you, before the pity and the charity dinners? Danielle hesitated. No one had asked her that in 6 years. A structural engineer actually, she admitted, almost laughing at the symmetry. I wanted to design housing, real housing for people told they didn't deserve anything better. Tae-hyun was quiet a long moment. Finish your degree, he said finally. Whatever else happens between us, I'll make sure nothing gets in the way. You don't have to fix my life to make up for buying 2 years of it. I'm not offering to fix it, he said. I'm offering not to be one more obstacle in it. It was a small distinction. She would think about it for weeks before she understood why it mattered. The wedding, when it came, was smaller than the tabloids would later claim and colder than either of them let the cameras see. It was a courthouse ceremony with a single photograph released to 3 outlets at once, timed to control the story before anyone else could shape it. Danielle told herself one more time that she would feel nothing. She was wrong within a month. In small increments she didn't notice piling up. Tae-hyun knocking before entering rooms that were legally his. Calls rerouted so they wouldn't interrupt dinner. The one night she found him frozen in the doorway of his locked study, staring at something on the desk before he closed the door so she couldn't see it. "What's in there?" she had asked. "My father's ledgers, old ones. I go through them looking for things he might have hidden that could still hurt the organization if they surfaced." A pause. "I haven't finished, some of it I've been putting off for years." Why? Because some truths are easier to inherit than to read. She didn't understand what he meant yet. 3 weeks into the marriage, a black lacquered box arrived without a note. Inside was a ring, quieter and older than she'd expected, set in a band that looked like it carried history she wasn't permitted to know. Her phone buzzed. Car downstairs at 7, press conference at 8, merger announcement, board wants a united front, where something that photographs well and says nothing. She closed the box slowly. 3 weeks and she was already lying to herself about what she felt when she opened it. At 7:15 she stepped out of the black car into a wall of photographers. Tae-hyun's hand settled at the small of her back with a familiarity that felt rehearsed, until his thumb pressed once briefly against her spine. A silent question. "Are you all right?" "Smile," he murmured near her ear, quiet enough for only her. "Not for them, for you, you've earned tonight." Board members flanked the stage. They were older men Danielle recognized from photographs in his study, watching his every gesture like men deciding whether an inheritance had been wasted. One of them, introduced only as Director Yoon, studied her a beat too long before looking away. Before the merger documents could even be unveiled, a voice rang out from the crowd of reporters, sharp, deliberate, aimed like a blade. "Mr. Kang. Is it true your new wife is the daughter of Adiz Chidozi, the woman connected to your organization's activities in Lagos 8 years ago?" The world went silent. Danielle felt Tae-hyun's hand go rigid against her back. She turned to look at him, and for the first time since the night they'd met, she saw something she had never seen on his face before. Fear. "Mr. Kang," the reporter pressed, stepping closer, microphone thrust forward like a weapon. "Can you confirm or deny? This press conference is about the merger," Tae-hyun said, his voice gone flat and controlled. It was the voice of a man learning to sound calm while something inside him detonated. "Questions about my wife's family history are not on the agenda tonight. You're not denying it. I'm telling you where the line is." Security moved. The reporter retreated, but the damage had already spread. Every camera was now trained on Dimple instead of the podium, and behind them, Director Yun had gone very still, watching not the reporter but Tae-hyun, the way a man watches to see how another man handles a blow he didn't expect but perhaps should have. Udaza Chudaza, her mother's name. Spoken in a hotel ballroom in Seoul by a stranger, tied to something Dimple had spent her entire life being told was a car accident. She made it through the rest of the press conference on instinct, a hand on his arm, a practiced smile, a single sentence to a friendlier reporter about being unarud to support her husband's work. She didn't remember the car ride home. She remembered the penthouse door closing behind them, turning to face him and finding her voice again. "How was my mother to ya?" Tae-hyun didn't answer immediately. He crossed to the bar cart, poured 2 fingers of something amber and didn't drink it. "Down, Dimple. I don't want to sit down. I want you to tell me why a reporter just connected your organization to my mother's death. It's not that simple. Then make it simple." Her voice cracked and she hated that it did. "My whole life I was told she died in an accident that both my parents did, and that's why I ended up being treated like a debt someone was forced to pay off. Now a stranger with a microphone says otherwise." Her set the glass down without drinking it. When he finally looked at her, the composure he wore like armor everywhere else had cracked at the edges. Years ago," he said quietly, "my father ran this organization. There was a woman, an accountant, brilliant, who discovered money moving through a children's charity in Lagos that shouldn't have been moving there. She started asking questions the wrong people didn't want asked." Dimple's stomach turned to ice. "She had a daughter," he continued, each word deliberate like he was forcing himself through fire. "The decision was made that she needed to be stopped. I was 23, I didn't give the order, I found out after. Her name, Udaza Chudaza's room tilted. Dimple gripped the back of a chair to stay upright. "You knew," she said. "At the wedding you knew who I was before you ever offered me that contract. You knew and you still," her voice broke entirely. "Was any of this real? Was I ever anything other than guilt you were trying to burrow?" "It started that way," Tae-hyun admitted, and the honesty of it landed harder than any lie could have. I recognized your name months ago at a gathering your aunt dragged you to. I've spent 8 years trying to find some way to live with something I didn't order but didn't stop either. Sir, I was a transaction to soothe your conscience. That's how it started, he said again firmer. It is not how it feels now. Dunt. Stepped back, arms wrapped around herself. Don't you dare say something like that to me tonight. Something in his phrasing snagged in her memory. She stopped replaying it. You keep saying the decision was made. Not that your father decided. Whose decision was it? Tae-hyun went very still. My father ran the organization, he said carefully. The order came from the top, that's what I've believed for 8 years. That's not an answer, that's a sentence you've rehearsed. Skpras flickered across his face. He hadn't expected her to catch the gap. I was 23, he said again quieter. I wasn't in the room, then who was? His phone rang before he could answer, buzzing violently against the bar cart. He listened for 6 seconds and his face went the hulk of ash. One, he said into the phone, not a question, a demand. Lock the building, nobody in or out, I'm coming down. Her ended the call and turned to her, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw him look genuinely afraid. Someone accessed the hotel's guest registry an hour before the press conference, he said. They knew your legal name before that reporter ever spoke it. This came from inside my own organization, Dempul. Only a handful of people had access. Somewhere below them, 30 floors down, the sound of shattering glass echoed up through the ventilation system, followed a heartbeat later by the piercing wail of the fire alarm. Tae-hyun was moving before the second wail finished, phone already at his ear. Status. A pause, his shoulders dropped a fraction, not relaxed, recalibrated. A controlled fire in the parking structure, not an accident. Pull every camera feed from the last 2 hours. Tae-hyun. Dempul was on her feet too, voice steadier than she felt. Are we in danger right now in this room? He looked at her and she watched him decide, visibly, deliberately, to stop managing her the way he managed everyone else in his life. Yes, he said. Get your coat. They took the service stairwell instead of the elevator, his hand wrapped around her wrist the entire way down, not gripping the way her aunt once had, but anchoring, checking every landing before he let her pass through it. 2 men in dark suits fell into step behind them at the 4th floor without a word exchanged. You had security in place before you ever told me any of this, Dempul said, breathless. Had security in place since the night I offered you that ring, he said. What I don't have is certainty about who inside my own organization just helped someone find you. They emerged into an underground garage 2 blocks away, a second building she hadn't known existed, reached through a tunnel that clearly wasn't on any official blueprint. A car waited, engine running. Only once they were moving through empty pre-dawn streets, doors locked, did he finally let go of her wrist. I'm sorry, he said quietly. Which part? All of it, that you found out about your mother in a hotel ballroom instead of from me. His hands braced on his knees, knuckles pale. I've spent 8 years telling myself that finding you and taking care of you quietly would be enough to live with what happened. I never let myself consider what would happen if you found out loudly in public with no warning. Dempul stared out at the city sliding past, glittering and indifferent. I want to hate you. You should. You're the only person who's told me the truth about my own mother in 18 years. Her voice wavered. And which man are you tonight? Yours or your father's? Tunut, he said. I'm the man who's going to find out who inside my organization did this and finish what should have ended 8 years ago, with the truth instead of silence. They reached a suff-hus on the city's outskirts an hour before dawn. It was modest, unremarkable, betraying nothing of what it protected. Dempul didn't sleep. She sat wrapped in a blanket, replaying every version of her mother she'd ever been told, trying to reconcile the woman who had died in an accident with the woman who had apparently stood alone against powerful men and refused to back down. Near dawn, a soft knock came. Tae-hyun stood in the hallway, 2 mugs of tea in hand, looking like a man who hadn't slept either. Mara, she stepped aside to let him in. They sat in silence a while, tea cooling untouched, before Dempul spoke. Tell me about her, whatever you actually know, not the version you've rehearsed for 8 years. Something in his expression softened, not the diplomacy of the ballroom, not the fear of the last 12 hours, but something quieter and more human. She was fearless, he said. My father's people were terrified of her because she wasn't afraid of them the way everyone else was. She kept records, meticulous ones. Every transaction moving through that charity, every falsified receipt, every child's name used to launder money that never reached them. She wasn't trying to destroy anyone, she was trying to protect the children whose names were being stolen. Dempul's eyes burned. Nobody ever told me that. There's something else. He turned his mug slowly in his hands. Something I haven't let myself say out loud in 8 years. The order to stop her didn't come from my father directly. It came through his lieutenant, a man named Chus Youngmun, who told my father she'd already gone to the police, that there was no time to negotiate. My father was old by then, trusting, he believed Cha because Cha had never given him a reason not to. He looked up at her. I've spent 8 years telling myself my father made that choice alone. I'm no longer certain that's true. Cha disappeared the week my father died. I assumed grief or greed. I never once considered he might still be watching this family. Dunpul set down her tea, hands steadier now despite the ground shifting beneath a story reshaped twice in 2 days. Then we don't guess, she said. We prove it. There's a box. My aunt kept my mother's things in the attic. I was never allowed to open it, but she never let me throw it out either. If my mother was as careful as you say, she wouldn't have hidden evidence somewhere obvious. That's dangerous, Danielle. So is standing still. Attic of her aunt's house smelled exactly the way Danielle remembered, dust and old rain, and the particular silence of things no one wanted to remember. Tae-hyun's men had confirmed the house was empty before they'd even stepped inside. Her aunt and uncle had fled the country within hours of the press conference, unwilling to face a scandal they hadn't caused but would certainly be blamed for. The box was exactly where she remembered it, pushed into the farthest corner beneath a stack of old curtains, undisturbed for 18 years. Her hands shook as she lifted the lid. Inside, a folded blue dress, a child's drawing gone soft with age, a photograph of a woman with Danielle's exact eyes laughing at something outside the frame, and beneath a false bottom she nearly missed, a slim leather folder held shut with a cracked rubber band. She opened it with shaking hands. Ledger pages photocopied and yellowed, a column of numbers that meant nothing to her at first glance. These are shipment codes, Tae-hyun said slowly, crouching beside her, running a finger down a column. This routing, I've seen this exact pattern before. It's in my father's old ledgers, the ones in my study I haven't finished going through. What does it mean? It means the charity wasn't a single laundering channel, it was 2 running in parallel, dressed up to look like one. He frowned at a signature at the bottom of a page, faded but legible. This isn't my father's authorization, it's an internal approval code. I don't recognize the initials. Could it be Choi's? It's not his name. He went still, staring at the page like it had rearranged itself in front of him. This routing number matches an account I flagged 8 months ago during an internal audit. I assumed it was dormant. My father's people told me it belonged to a subsidiary that closed before I took over. Someone lied to you. Someone's been lying to me for years, he said, and for the first time she heard something in his voice that wasn't grief or guilt but fury. A floorboard creaked behind them. Tae-hyun went rigid, angling himself between Danielle and the doorway before she'd even registered the sound. Someone's here. Men, my men would announce themselves. His eyes fixed on the darkened stairwell. Stay behind me. A shape moved in the doorway, unhurried, deliberate. You always were predictable when it came to guilt, Tae-hyun. You've gotten sloppy, Tae-hyun said to the darkness. 8 years hiding and you walk in through the front door. I didn't need to hide from you tonight. A man stepped into what light the attic window offered, older than she expected, silver at his temples, a face once handsome now carved into something colder. I needed you to lead me here, though I'll admit I expected it to take longer. Choi Soo-min, Tae-hyun said, so this was him. The name Danielle had carried for 2 days finally had a face, ordinary, tired, almost kind if you didn't know better. His gaze moved past Tae-hyun and settled on the folder in her arms. Adi's daughter. Have her eyes? His eyes flicked back to the folder. You found the shipping codes, good, saves us time, though I doubt either of you understands yet what you're actually holding. Then explain it, Tae-hyun said, since you've clearly been waiting 8 years for the chance. Choi's mouth curved, not quite a smile. Your father built this organization on fear and the assumption that loyalty could be bought and stay bought. I served him 30 years and watched him make that mistake with everyone under him except me. His eyes flicked to the folder again. Your mother found one of my accounts, Danielle, not your organization's, Tae-hyun. Mine run parallel to the charity's real books for 11 years before she ever opened a single ledger. You're saying my father never knew, Tae-hyun said slowly. Your father knew there was money moving through that charity that wasn't strictly legitimate. That was the family business. What he didn't know was that a portion of it was mine. Skimmed. Hidden inside his own laundering scheme, using his authorization codes without his knowledge, because I was the one man he trusted enough to never check my work. Choi's composure flickered just once. Adi's didn't find your father's crime, she found mine hiding inside his. Danielle's stomach turned. So you told him she'd gone to the police. A lie. Necessary one. Your father was old, sentimental. He believed me because I'd given him 30 years of reasons to. I told him she was 36 hours from destroying everything he'd built, and he gave the order I needed. I've spent 8 years telling myself that made it his crime, not mine. A pause. I've mostly succeeded in believing it. Until now, Danielle said. Until now. Because that folder doesn't just prove what happened to your mother. It proves what I did to his father. Used him, lied to him, spent his authority to protect myself, and let his son spend 8 years hatting a dead man for a decision I engineered. If that reaches a prosecutor, it doesn't end with me in prison. It ends with every remaining loyalty inside your organization discovering that the men who built it were being quietly robbed by their most trusted lieutenant for over a decade. Your father's legacy collapses either way. I'm simply asking you to decide whether it collapses publicly or quietly. You're offering me a deal. I'm offering you a choice you've been avoiding since you inherited this, Choi said. Bury this and I disappear again permanently, or expose it and watch everything he built come apart along with everything you've spent 9 years holding together. Director Yoon, who watched you so carefully tonight, he was my second in this. There are others. Expose this and you're not simply prosecuting me. You're gutting your own board on the eve of the merger that keeps your legitimate business alive. Danielle felt the weight of it land on Tae-hyun beside her. There's a third option, she said quietly. Both men looked at her. You don't destroy the organization and you don't bury the truth. You choose which people inside it survive the truth and which don't. Yoon and whoever else Choi's talking about, they're not your father's legacy, Tae-hyun, they're Choi's. Cutting them out isn't gutting what your father built. It's finally finishing what he never had the courage to do. That's not how organizations like this work, Choi said, composure slipping. Ask him, he knows I'm right. Also knows you've been lying to him about his father's legacy for 8 years, Danielle said. Maybe it's time he stopped asking you what's true. Something shifted in Tae-hyun's face, not certainty yet but the first crack of a decision. There's a security team 2 minutes from this house, he said to Choi. You knew that when you walked in, which means you didn't come here to negotiate. I came here because I've spent 8 years assuming you'd choose the easier path. I'm not most men, Tae-hyun said. My wife taught me that phrase means something. Choi's hand moved toward his coat, and Tae-hyun was already moving, driving him back into a stack of old furniture hard enough that dust exploded from the rafters. The folder fell from Danielle's arms as she scrambled back against the wall. She heard herself scream his name. She heard metal clatter across the floorboards, spinning just out of both men's reach. She didn't think. She lunged for it, her fingers closed around cold metal half a second before Choi's. She scrambled back, putting the wall at her spine, the weapon shaking in both hands, pointed at a man for the first time in her life. Don't move. Choi froze, hands raised slightly. You won't do it. You have no idea what I would do, Danielle said. You spent 8 years assuming the daughter would be as easy to erase as the mother. You were wrong about both of us. Tae-hyun rose slowly beside her, breathing hard, blood at his split lip, not reaching for the gun, not taking it from her, simply standing beside her. Anchoring, not controlling. She's not bluffing, he told Choi quietly. I'd sit down if I were you. Headlights swept the attic window, his second security team arriving exactly on schedule. Choi's calm cracked as the odds shifted visibly against him. Yoon will bury this the moment I'm arrested, he said quickly. He'll destroy every record connecting him to me before you can move. You'll have me and nothing else. Is that really the victory you want? Tae-hyun looked at Danielle. Something passed between them, not a question, a confirmation of one already answered. Call the prosecutor directly, he said to the men flooding up the stairs. Not our lawyers, not the board. Tonight, before anyone inside this organization has time to make a phone call. He looked back at Choi. You're right that I could bury this and keep everything my father built intact. I've spent 9 years being the kind of man who chooses that option. I'm done being him. They restrained Choi with zip ties and controlled voices instead of the violence Danielle had braced for. Tae-hyun took the gun gently from her shaking hands and set it aside, then turned her face toward his. Are you hurt? No, I don't think so. You saved my life, again. You've spent this whole week trying to save mine. I figured it was time to return the favor. She hesitated. But Yoon and the others, if you go after them tonight, you could lose everything. The merger, the board, maybe the whole organization. I know. For the first time since she'd met him, he looked less like a man in control of an empire and more like one setting something down he'd been carrying too long. My father built this on men like Choi and Yoon. If exposing them costs me everything he left me, maybe it was never worth keeping in the first place. Danielle knelt and gathered the folder from the floor, holding it against her chest. She wanted this exposed, she said. Not buried, not avenged, quietly, exposed, where no one gets to rewrite what happened to her again. Then that's what we do, Tae-hyun said. Whatever it costs. The weeks after Choi's arrest were not the clean resolution Danielle had expected. Director Yoon resigned within 4 days, citing health reasons the press didn't believe and Tae-hyun didn't contradict. 2 more board members followed within the month, their departures quieter but no less deliberate. Men who had built careers inside a structure Choi had spent decades hollowing from within, and who understood faster than most when the ground had shifted permanently beneath them. The merger collapsed. Danielle watched Tae-hyun take that call in his study, watched him listen to a decade of legitimate business ambition dissolve in a 4-minute conversation, and watched him hang up without visible anger. "Not wrong to walk away," he said when she asked. "No serious investor finances a company mid-scandal. I knew that when I called the prosecutor. Do you regret it?" "No," he said, seeming almost surprised by how easily the word came. "I spent 9 years building toward that merger because I thought legitimacy would finally let me stop being my father's son. I understand now that legitimacy was never going to do that. Choosing what happened in that attic, that did. Organization didn't collapse, but it changed shape under him in ways the tabloids struggled to characterize. Divisions sold off, others folded into structures with actual oversight, a security division that Tae-hyun, over Danielle's initial objection, insisted remain intact. "Some part of this world doesn't disappear because I want it to," he told her. "People my father made enemies of don't stop existing because I've decided to be a better man than he was. I'd rather protect what's mine honestly than pretend I don't need to protect it at all." It was the most honest thing she'd heard him say about who he actually was, not reformed in some tidy sense, but a man doing the slow, unglamorous work of deciding, piece by piece, which parts of his inheritance he was willing to keep. Danielle, meanwhile, was building something of her own. She finished her degree that spring, structural engineering, the credential she'd almost given up on in a mildewed room above a kitchen that no longer had any claim on her. She didn't tell Tae-hyun until the results were posted. She wanted to hold one victory that belonged entirely to herself before she let anyone else touch it. She found him in his study when she finally told him. He didn't reach for her, didn't offer congratulations dressed as ownership. He simply looked at her the way a man looks at something he respects too much to interrupt. "What now?" he asked. "There's a housing non-profit in Lagos," Danielle said. "Rebuilding developments meant for families like the ones my mother tried to protect, the ones whose names got stolen for a charity that never reached them. I want to design for them, not because you're funding it, because I applied and they said yes and it has nothing to do with your name. I wasn't going to offer to fund it." "I know," she said. "That's why I told you." She spent 4 months in Lagos that year, longer than either of them had planned, building something with her own hands that had nothing to do with contracts or debts or the particular kind of rescue Tae-hyun had once offered her in a ballroom. He didn't follow her there. He didn't send security she hadn't asked for. He waited, the way a man waits when he's finally understood the difference between missing someone and needing to control where they are. Choi Seung-min's sentencing took place on a grey morning in Seoul, brief and procedural, by the time it arrived. The real fight had happened months earlier, in depositions where Danielle had testified twice, her voice steady both times in a way that surprised the prosecutor more than it surprised her. Yoon was indicted separately 3 weeks later, on charges traced through records Tae-hyun's rebuilt compliance division had spent months reconstructing. Proof, if anyone still needed it, that the organization he ran now operated by different rules than the one his father had built. The press, who had once hounded Danielle outside a hotel over her mother's name, wrote a different story by the time the verdicts landed. Not a scandal about a mafia king's convenient young wife, but the account of a woman who had helped dismantle the men responsible for her mother's death. Then gone, and built something with her own hands 7,000 kilometers away from any of it. She read one article twice, alone in the Lagos apartment she'd kept for the project's last month, and felt something settle in her chest she hadn't expected. Not vindication exactly, but recognition. For the first time in her life, the story being told about her belonged to her. She flew back to Seoul on her own terms, on a date she chose, and didn't tell Tae-hyun which flight. He was at the airport anyway, no security fanning out, no cameras arranged in advance. Just a man standing alone near arrivals the way anyone might wait for someone they'd missed. "How did you know which flight?" "I didn't," he said. "I've been coming for the last 3. Something in her chest loosened, not gratitude, but the specific, quiet ache of being wanted without being managed. It was on a beach 2 hours outside the city, weeks later, no photographers and no merger to protect, that Danielle finally said what she'd been carrying since the airport. "I don't need saving anymore," she said. "I want you to understand that clearly because for a long time neither of us was sure what this actually was." "I know," Tae-hyun said. "I stopped needing to save you the moment you picked up that gun. I've spent the months since trying to figure out what's left to offer someone who doesn't need anything from me." "What did you land on?" "Nothing," he said. "I don't have anything you need. I have things I want to give you anyway if you'll let me, not because you're owed them and not because I'm still settling a debt my family created, because I want to build a life alongside you, not instead of you." He didn't produce a ring with any ceremony. He simply reached for the one she still wore on a chain around her neck, the one that had arrived in a black lacquered box 3 weeks into a marriage that started as a transaction, and held it between them. Danielle, I'm not asking you to renew a contract. I'm asking if you'll choose me, the same way you chose Lagos and your degree and testifying twice against a man who could have hurt you for it. Freely. Because you want to, not because you need to. She looked at the ring, then at him. At the man who had once been a stranger she feared, then an obligation she resented, then a partner in something neither of them fully understood until they'd nearly lost it. And finally, simply, someone she wanted beside her without needing him for anything at all. Yes, she said, and it cost her nothing and meant everything because for the first time in her life, she was choosing something entirely for herself. Months later, Danielle hung a single photograph in the Seoul apartment, the one she'd found in her mother's attic box, Adiz Chidozi laughing at something outside the frame, finally displayed somewhere with light instead of dust. Beside it was her structural engineering degree. Beneath both was a small brass plate bearing words she'd chosen herself once the Lagos project broke ground under her name and no one else's. Survived and built anyway. She had spent her whole life being told she was disposable. She had learned, standing in the wreckage of everything that once defined her, that survival was never the end of the story. It was only ever the foundation. If Danielle's journey touched you, take a moment to like this story and subscribe for more powerful love stories filled with betrayal, secrets, redemption, and second chances. And tell me in the comments, would you have forgiven Tae-hyun after discovering the truth about Danielle's mother, or would you have walked away? Your answer might surprise you. Thank you for staying with Danielle until the very end. Until the next story, remember, sometimes survival isn't the end of the story. Sometimes it's the foundation.